Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Beit Midrash. Hope everybody had a good week and is feeling good and doing well. And welcome to Chapter 2 of God of Becoming and Relationship by Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson. Um, we were talking just before I started hitting record. I taught this book one other time, and some of the students were saying, I don't think I'm smart enough for this book. Um, and I'm like, you're plenty smart enough. It's not a matter of intellect, it's a matter of language. If you speak philosophy, this is easy. This is like you just kind of breeze through it. Um, you know, if you don't speak philosophy, it's more challenging. If you were to read, I remember when I was younger, we had to read Le Petit Prince in French. I'm sure if I read it in English, I would have breezed through that book much faster than I did having to do it in French. But it's a different language. And if any of you were to give me a physics textbook, I do not think I could breeze through it as quickly as I can get through a chapter of this. So, it's a matter of language, and that'll be the goal of today's class, is to translate this chapter a little bit. Sound good? So before we jump in, any thoughts, comments, questions, reactions? Aside from the language was a little hard in some of it. Yes, Christine.
Well, maybe I'm just a huge nerd, but I love it. I love every bit of it. And it kind of reminds me of when we studied the 13 Petaled Rose with Rabbi Miller some years ago. And we got almost to the end of it. And he got so frustrated with it, he threw it down and said, that's it, we're done. So please don't do that. I want to stick with this as hard as it might be.
No, I'm not going to give up on you. Don't worry.
Okay, good.
As I say, if I can get wade through Talmud Sugiot and not throw my book across the room, which you can ask my chavruta in rabbinical school, I almost did a few times. If I can do that, I can get through this. So, Margaret, you're muted. Muted.
Are you wanting to jump in, or are you wanting more general comments?
Either or.
Well, I would jump in on page 1.
Page 1 or page 9?
Well, the first page of this chapter, whatever page.
So page 9, yes.
Whatever page it may be. And first of all, I gather that that God is sort of a priori. There's no, arguing about that. So we get reality is relational, and the cosmos is constantly interacting, and our atoms are changing, and all that is fine, no problem with that. And then he says that relating should sound familiar to any Jew, because our word for that dynamic relating is brit, meaning covenant. And covenant is always interactive. And that feels to me like he is really pushing it. I mean, I can see Brit as interactive, as connecting, as relational, but I don't see covenant as having anything to do whatsoever with atoms, and I breathe in, and breathing in the air that rabbits breathe out, and all of that kind of stuff. I don't get that.
Okay, so let's start there. What is let's start with, what is our general understanding of covenant? Of what does that word mean to us generally?
Uh, uh,
Our agreement with God.
but we got to deal
Okay.
with God. We got to deal with God.
We got to deal with God. And what is that deal?
That God looks after us, and we look after Him. Her,
A two-way relationship.
whatever.
Okay, a long-term
Relationship.
two-way relationship in which both parties are mutually obligated. That's how we usually think of it, yes. Now, I'm sure he will say more about covenant and Brit down the line, but and I do that out of faith and confidence more than actual recollection of whether or not he does. But I'm sure Rabbi Artson will say more about this down the line. But at least where we are in this place in the book, if we think of it as a two-way, mutually obligatory street, it still makes sense that there are certain rules and laws of nature that do not break each other, but that are dependent upon each other. The laws of physics will always be the laws of physics, and you cannot change that no matter how much you change no matter how much you change what's going on around the environment. The laws of physics don't change. There are certain things that are dependent in nature that will react to each other, but that are part of the fabric of nature.
But is that actually true in physics? I mean, haven't some things changed in physics? Aren't there, I don't know anything about physics, but I know there are questions about black holes and things that people assumed before that are no longer holding.
What was the question about physics there? Sorry.
He was saying that there are some things that in physics that, just are absolutely true.
Esther, I would say that our understanding of things have changed. Our explanations have changed.
Yeah, he goes a little overboard in his physics things from my understanding, but I think it is fair to say that the nature of particles is absolutely unknown, and current understanding is absolutely correct. To say that there's a solid thing is not correct. I think he goes a little overboard when he says we're absolutely permeable to the world, because we're not, and those are not the same thing. Generally speaking, yeah, there's no understanding that things are solid.
Well, I mean, to me, this first part of this chapter, he's trying to me, explain God in a scientific way. I mean, that's but the thing, it's confusing because God, we're giving God, because we don't know what God is really, but we're giving God human traits. God will forgive us if we do X, Y, Z, right? That's a human description of what God might be able to do. We still don't know what God is. And God, I mean, people in science are understanding the world more and more. So what is string theory, for instance? What string theory will tell you is that if a butterfly is flying in your room, it is interacting with the rest of nature, and there's some reaction even in a different universe to what that butterfly is doing. So you can understand God in in a scientific way, even though I think we've tried to keep our understanding of God in more of a faith-related way, not in a scientific way. But I think that's the confusing thing to me, is that he's describing God, to me, in more of a scientific way than in a faith-based way.
No,
Well,
I think he's trying to break down the idea that I think he's actually trying to break down the idea that we try to understand God in a straightforward way, and that we try to understand ourselves as existing in discrete things. And he's trying to say that's not even how our understanding of reality should be, let alone trying to put that on God. So in some ways, I think he's trying to use as a metaphor for how we understand things.
Let's maybe back up half a step here. I think in some sense what he's trying to do is say, reconcile our faith in God with our scientific understanding of the universe. And say, in fact, I think what his claim in some part here is that we think of the two often in conflict, when in reality, the way we think about the world and reality is actually the way we think about God also. We just don't think of, we try to separate the two and think of them as discrete things when they're really not. And he's trying to say, you don't have to think of it that way, that there's actually a way that the way we actually think about the world is the same way we can think about God as well. Now, some of it, we'll maybe table some of the concept of covenant until he'll circle back to it, probably in part 2. I think what he's kind of getting at, though, is that we are constantly in relationship with the world around us, and we tend not to think of ourselves as in relationship with the world around us, but we are. So, the other day, somebody, backed into my car, small fender bender, no big deal, whatever. But that, it's not one body ramming into another body. And they're not two discrete objects. They are objects that are connected to each other by relationship. My car was not really connected to his car until they got connected. That there's a sense of we are in constant relationship and interaction with the world around us. And as such, we're not static in the sense that we don't change, or we don't move through the world, or as we move through the world, we're affected by what's going on in that world around us. So, in some sense, if you walk down the street on a beautiful day like today, you are having a different experience than if you are walking down the street on a rainy day like last night. And I think that's a little bit of his point he's trying to make, is we're not just separate beings, but that we are in constant relationship and give and take with the world around us. Barbara Allen, did you have something?
Well, yeah, so many things, but did you go too far when you said that the two cars are not discrete? They are discrete. Did you take them both in to get fixed? I mean, they're two different things. And I get the whole relationship thing, and I'm fine with that. But then we start talking about they're not discrete. That doesn't, I just don't get that. And I will say about Margaret's, I agree with her with a problem with that sentence, but I really think what he did wrong was say our word for that dynamic relating. He made it sound like that's our word for the scientific thing, but I think what he meant was our word for covenant is dynamic, which I can agree with. It is dynamic, but it's not necessarily our word for that dynamic relationship.
Well,
so it just
there's a difference, but there's a difference in the semantics there. Is that if you say that the difference in that dynamic, or what does he say, that that relating, our word for that dynamic relating is brit. That means that, in some sense, we are in mutual obligation with each other as we walk through the world, and there are basic concepts that we understand and hold each other to as we exist. Saying the Brit is dynamic, I don't think Rabbi Artson would necessarily argue that, but the difference is that it implies that the covenant itself is dynamic and that the covenant itself is changing, which is probably true, and we'll probably get to that when we talk about covenants later. I'm trying to check the table of contents to see when we do, but
yeah, because the first part of your sentence is trivial, and the second part of your concept is non-trivial. It seems to me.
So, but even with somebody backing into my car, there's an understanding there that the cars are still in relationship to each other. That even if he had not backed into my car, based on my reactions and my relationship with my car, was reacting to his relationship with his car. So when his car moves forward, I move forward in relationship with that car. When he backs up, he backed up too quickly for me to back up in relationship to him, but that's kind of, I think, where it's going, is that there's a relationship and response, and that we are constantly interacting with every part, and everything that we do is in relationship with everything else that's going on in this world. That's, I think, the groundwork he's trying to lay here. Is it's not just me walking down the street, but as I'm walking down the street, I'm having a concrete effect on the world, and the world is affecting me simultaneously. Lisa?
Yeah, so going back to the days of the Torah that either God or man wrote about, it's clear that we're in a relationship with God, and God's not always happy with us, or God talks to us and tells us things that we should do or that we shouldn't do, and it's very clear that we're in a relationship. So are we supposed to sort of imagine that we're in that same kind of relationship with God now, even though God is not like visibly, concretely in any way, talking to us except through, our imagination or thinking or thought process? I mean, are we supposed to be in that same kind of relationship that we were back when God was really concretely part of our lives?
So we might have to circle back to that shortly, but I think what Rabbi Artson is arguing is, yes, we are in relationship with God, but I don't think he's imagining the relationship in the same way that I think we have been taught about the relationship in the Torah. So let's back up again for one moment. So part of the argument is the world itself is never static. Atoms are constantly moving, atoms are constantly shifting. And, even when we are completely at rest, even if, I'm sitting and meditating, my body is still dynamic and changing. My heart is still pumping, blood is still moving through my veins, I'm still breathing. so there's a constant sense of change and dynamism inherent in the world that we live in. And it reacts to the world that we live in. So, when I bump my shin, and hurt a blood vessel, the blood flow, the vessel leaks and creates a bruise. There's a connection, and I think part of what is, page 10 and 11, he's saying, but where we are now is a buildup of everything that came before. So the present is somewhat created by everything that happened before it. So on one level, if I didn't bump my shin, then I wouldn't have a bruise and I'd be sitting here without a bruise on my shin. If the guy hadn't backed into my car, I wouldn't have a dent in my car and I wouldn't have to figure out when I'm going to get it fixed. These are all part of the present is all built in what happened in the past, and we can't really adjust or change it in any way. Everybody good with that so far? Now, that doesn't just apply to me personally, but that also applies by and large. So, for example, if my parents had decided to marry different people other than each other, I may or may not be here in this role, in this position at this particular time. I might be a completely different person because I would have had completely different genetics and made completely different choices based on the decision my parents made at that particular moment.
Why did you say you might be if they hadn't married each other and didn't have kids together?
I mean, likely I would not be identical to who I am. Whether or not I would be sitting here at all is a different question. I wouldn't be who I am currently. Would I still have become a rabbi, and would I still be teaching a class on process theology? That would be a completely different set of questions and choices and circumstances.
It wouldn't have,
it would have taken a completely different set of questions.
In an I. You wouldn't have been your I.
You wouldn't have been you at all.
Exactly.
I mean, there wouldn't be you. You wouldn't exist. Some other person might exist, but you're saying that person is you, but that person isn't you. You're gone.
Yes.
You didn't come to be.
You guys are getting I was trying to simplify it, but you guys are getting the point. So, yes, like I would not be me. Some other child that might have been created may or may not have become a rabbi and been drawn to process theology. But that, if they had, it would have been based on a completely different set of choices and decisions that would have been made along the way. But we can't really change that either. That's kind of the reality we're in, is that, my parents married each other and they raised me, and this is where I am at this moment, based on the choices that I made that led me to this moment. And as we discussed last chapter, I had a free will to make those each choice along the way, as did my parents, who made the choice to marry each other as opposed to someone else. Barbara Brandy?
The point that I was going to make is that it was your choice to have your car where he could hit you. And I think that Rabbi Artson gets into that when he's talking about the dipolarity, the fact that there are decisions coming in on both sides, or there are points of view coming in from both sides. So I didn't mean to interrupt where you were getting to something a little more serious than having your car get bumped into. But, it applies simply because that was your choice to have your car there. It was his choice to back up. So,
Like
yeah,
I could have left more space between my car and his.
or you
and-
could have been on the road 15 minutes earlier.
Debatably, based on what I was doing before that, but yes, like I could have not gone to the store beforehand, and I could have gone straight home and gone to the store later, and then I wouldn't. Yes, like there's decisions that I made that led me to that point, and yes, we could back up, and all those, and any of those decisions would have likely resulted in me not getting
A different outcome.
dent in my car. At least would not a dent in my car from that particular individual. May have gotten a dent in my car from somebody else based on where I was. Yes. You go down the rabbit hole of this too much, and your brain can. But yes, part of me getting the dent in my car was a result of decisions I made as well as decisions that he made, and our decisions were in relationship with each other.
So I think everybody understands this, and I would like to say that I found the statement in the subsequent chapter, at the beginning of the subsequent section, that we and the rest of creation are not static substances, but we and everything that exists are events. And I thought that was an interesting idea to think about, and one that had not occurred to me before, or had not run across before.
Margaret,
Yeah,
what page is that?
That's page 10.
I'm reading this on a Kindle, and it's
Okay.
just the next page on my, but it's under the heading "The Give and Take of Sight."
It was page 10.
Page
It's at
10.
the
Yeah.
very top.
I was following.
It took me a second to find it, but I found it.
Me too.
Yes, and that's part of the decision making, is that we make these we are events in that we are the result of what is happening, what we are choosing, and what is happening around us simultaneously. I found the end of that paragraph a better explanation that, on a molecular and biological level, we interact with our environment, inhaling air, ingesting food, absorbing heat or cold. We are constantly engaging in a give and take with the rest of creation, all simultaneously. That helped explain it better for me, at least. Help me
I think it's even better at the end of that section, where it says, we always make our choices from the particular context that is the sum of our total previous choices.
Yes.
And the world's previous choices, so that stuff builds on what happened before.
Exactly. But now this is where where God comes into this, is that God is a partner with the world in its own becoming. God kind of is standing with the world, helping it become and responding to what the world is responding to. So, given the fact that all of these choices that I have made going down the line have led me to this moment, I have other choices to make that will influence the choice that comes next. So, I have a choice of whether or not I'm going to get the dent in my car fixed. I have a choice of who I'm going to go to help get that car fixed, if I so choose to do so. I have a choice of whether or not I'm going to try to do it myself and risk causing more damage to the car because I'm not that handy. These are choices that that come before us, and God holds out the choices. And when we make that choice, then God offers us, okay, this is the choice you made. Now what's the choice after that? and then you make that choice, and God will choose the one after that. Yes, Margaret.
I have a question on. So then there's this paragraph called, or a heading called "Meeting God in the Moment," which
Yes.
goes on to explicate exactly more of what you've just said. And then there's an indented paragraph, a quote that says, "Why was this world created through the letter Hey?" And I don't understand that. I mean, I looked at Bereshit and I didn't find anything that.
If you look at the footnote.
Well, I looked at the footnote and
Yeah.
I didn't understand.
So he's giving the citation for that. Yehuda Bar Eli is the rabbi who stated it in the Talmud Menachot.
Right. I thought maybe I didn't look that up in the Talmud. I thought maybe I'd circumvent that by asking you.
So no, I'm just like he's citing a source that offers this, and so if you look at the letter Hey,
right,
the letter Hey is open on the bottom and on one side.
Right, I get that.
Who is it? Rabbi Moshe Cordovero has a different take on the letter Hey and about tshuva, and says, when tshuva is really easy to fall out the bottom, like Hey is big opening on the bottom. It's like it's really easy to fall out the bottom because it's big. It's a lot harder to get through tshuva, which is the little hole on the top. He says it a little better than I did, but that's the gist. But I think that's what Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eli is trying to argue here is, if God created the world through the letter Hey, which is the argument he's clearly making, then why? Because there's still a choice. Like there's an opening. It's not closed off like a chet.
Got it. But where does he come with the idea? I mean, where
Right.
in
There's got to be a connection on the other side.
Where is he picking up on the letter Hey? I mean, as I said, I looked at Bereshit and I couldn't find anything that would, at the beginning that would give me a connection. And I thought maybe you could tell me why.
Here we go. Well, let's pull up Menachot.
Where he came up
I
with
said 29b, right?
Yeah. Or maybe I'm just taking class time because I'm being too persnickety about something.
In other
I
places,
feel the same way. Like, were they going through all the letters and saying, was it made with this? I mean, there had to be some background to this that we're not getting.
They do that with a lot of Hebrew letters. They talk about, well, this one stands on one foot, it's not stable. This one stands on 2 feet. They do that with a lot of letters. And I think here they're talking about easy choices versus hard choices. An easy choice is letting yourself fall out the bottom. And it's harder
I understand what they're talking about. I just don't know where, I mean, I just don't know where.
So let's try this.
I mean, I would have thought, I was looking for, like creation, bara, or something like that, would be the word that.
You guys see Menachot?
Yeah.
You can see? Okay, hold on. Let me find you because I lost my screen here. Okay. So,
if
Rabbi,
you're supposed to read that, you're going to need to make it bigger.
Well, I think I can try. I think that's probably about as big as I can make it. But let me see.
Okay. Try Control plus.
Zoom in the middle.
Yeah, I was trying to find Zoom. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So Rav Ashi is responding to this part of the discussion. But this is as Rabbi Yehuda Bar Elai taught, that the verse for Biyah is God and everlasting rock is understood as follows. Tzur Olamim, everlasting rock, can also mean creator of worlds. Tzur rather than rock can also be read as like a tzur, can also mean like a creator. So the creator of worlds. These letters, Yud and He, that constitute the word Yah, are referring to the two worlds that the Holy Blessed be He created. One with the letter He, and one with the letter Yud. And I do not know whether the world to come was the letter Yud, and this world was the letter He, or vice versa. So he's arguing based on a verse. Let me find the beginning of the verse. So Isaiah 26:4, trust in the Lord forever, for in the Lord is God an everlasting rock. They're reading that as the Biyah, let me find the verb. In the Hebrew, so Biyah Tzur Olamim, they're reading as through the Yud and the He, God created worlds. And they're trying to argue which one is which. And you go down a little bit later, and for what reason was this world created specifically with the letter He? It's because the letter He, which is open on its bottom, has a similar appearance to a portico, which is open on one side. And it alludes to this world where anyone who wishes to leave may leave. And every person has a choice. You can choose to do good, or you can choose to not. You may proceed if you wish, is kind of how Rabbi Artson translates it. And what is the reason that the left leg is suspended? It is because if one repents, he is brought back in through the opening at the top. That's related to what I was talking about with Rabbi Cordovero's interpretation before.
Okay, thank you for indulging me in that rabbit hole.
So, Rabbi, can I ask you a question?
You're getting Talmud. I mean, you're getting some Talmud study, and that's not a bad thing. Yes, Stuart.
So, the whole discussion about the relationship that we have with God and the way that the physical world works. So the physical world works like your car hitting this other car. Not only did this happen, but both were changed. I mean, his car was changed, your car was changed. All right. So we have this relationship with God. And to me, it seems as if, as we're reading the Torah, that God, there is some evolution in the way that God thinks about man, thinks about the world. So my question is, do humans cause God to change? Because there's this relationship, there's this interaction, there's this dipolarity there. Do we change God by what we do in the physical world? And if so, I mean, that would be pretty profound. I mean, it would, then I would say, well, what sort of things should we be doing that would change God in a way that the relationship would be improved?
Yeah, I think he said this a little bit in the last chapter, but I can't find it now. But, yes, I think that is part of his argument, is that God, is page 12, that God does not and cannot know the future because the future has not yet been decided. In choosing to create, God made a world that has the capacity to make choices too. So when we make choices, our choices affect God as well. And God responds to our choices. I couldn't find the exact page. I'm sure I will find it after class, and that'll, when I'm not teaching it. But, you look at the story of Noah, God responds to human action and says that God regretted making humanity. That's a reaction that's a response and a reaction to our choices. or to the choices of humanity at that time. At the very least, God responds by what choices God offers us next. That God can't offer us the same choices as if we had chosen something else. Does that make sense? Karen?
Yeah, can you hear me?
You're not driving though, right?
I'm not driving.
Then you're
I'm
fine.
being driven.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm interacting with my environment. So I had a question right before Stuart's about what the source, like what you showed, the what we were talking about, the letters.
Yes.
Who are those? Are those the mystics, the ones that wrote that? Are those the Kabbalists?
No,
Where
this
did they?
was a Talmud. So these were Amoraim. I'll put it this way: they were Amoraim. They were rabbis somewhere between the 3rd and 5th century. Whether or not they were mystics is a completely different question. But they were Kabbalah, and the Kabbalists down the line pick up on some of the things they say in the Talmud and twist it and play on it and use it for mystical purposes. Whether or not this was intended for mystical purposes is a different question. Like whether Yehuda Bar Eli was is a different question, and I don't know the answer to that.
But this was, wait, which century did you say again?
Probably somewhere between the 3rd and 5th. I'd have to look up Yehuda Bar Eli.
Okay, but the 3rd and 5th century introducing this idea with the letters. Okay, and then it's picked up on by the mystics and by Rabbi Artson.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Esther.
So I think my question kind of goes along with where Stuart was going, I think. I was reading this line: after you make the choice, the selected option becomes part of God's consequent nature. And before I read that line, I thought, well, what are God's choices? And this kind of implies, in some ways, that God made all his choices when he created us, and that at this point, all that he has to offer us are options of what our choices are. At least that's kind of my question. Are there choices that God can still make? And it speaks to what is the power of God, which is what I think this whole thing is about for me. So I'll just throw that out there. Does that make any sense?
I think so. And yes, I think God does still have choices to make. And what choices are available to offer us are part of what God's choices are. But God is limited to the point that God's choices are in relationship with our own.
Bless you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bless you.
Thank you.
But
So
it
that
could be
God
more.
is limited to the choices that God can make based on the choices that we make.
Can I say something? I have a little problem with the idea that like God is actively making all these choices. To me, it's more like God created the world, or whatever, if you want to go there, and gave us free will and set up a system to where all these choices have consequences. For instance, we choose to not take care of our environment, then the nature sort of has its revenge on us, like it's doing now. Now we have another choice. We could either continue to make it worse and possibly destroy ourselves, or we can try to do everything we can to correct where we have gone wrong. And these are not choices that, God's not doing that. We are. And we are making choices. You can say that you make choices based on your values and your core beliefs that you got from your religion in as well as other things. And that's how we're interacting with God. But the idea that God is now presenting us with more different choices, as soon as you go there, then you're back to God letting horrible things happen to very innocent beings. The end.
So I'm not sure I agree.
I wouldn't expect that you would. I just had to say it.
But that speaks again to what are the choices available to God, and what I guess that really it becomes highlighted for me. Is God just a bystander responding to what we do, and what does that mean in terms of reality, or is this just something that is about faith in our heads that anyways, I don't know how to say it.
I'll respond to Cindy, and then I'll respond to this question, but go ahead, Cindy.
So I am pleased to say, as in other things, Esther speaks for me. but so I am wrestling with the same problem. Does God only exist in a way that God is offering us choices? I feel like there has to be more. Is that what Rabbi Artson is saying? That Rabbi Artson is limiting God to our option, giving us our options, or is there more to God than what we're talking about right now? I mean, is that like what you're saying, Esther? Yeah, I mean, is there more there? It just seems so very simplistic that, we act, God gives us choices. So the next day we wake up and we're a different person. We have the opportunity to make new choices that God has presented us with based on the past. I mean, that just seems like such a limited God. And maybe I'm making it too simplistic because I can't think more broadly.
So if you start turning to page 14 and 15, skipping over the dipolarity, which I think we can understand that, God relates differently in different times and different circumstances under different conditions. Just as, in some sense, I am a rabbi to you, and I am a husband to Orly, and I am a father to children, and I'm a son to my father. That's dipolarity, that God relates differently in different circumstances. And so what exactly is God doing in this? If you look at 14, the middle paragraph, God is not separate from space-time. God permeates it. God fills it. That means that God is eternal in some respects. God's reliability, God's being the steady source of creating, absolutely eternal, and dynamic in some respects. Meaning that there are some parts of God that are static, in that God is always present. We can trust that God is there, but that God is still changing in relationship to us. But you go to 15 at the top, God, for process theology, is manifest as the ground of novelty. God is to be found in the fact that a universe that is established through fixed, changeless propensities still generates novelty all the time. New, unprecedented things that did not previously exist. God shares in the experiences of all creatures and is experienced by all creatures. God permeates the world and God dwells within the world, which is at the bottom. So God, things happen, things are created that have not happened before, and God is found in those things in some sense. God is present in every experience of every creature at all times. God is still shaped by those experiences, but is not limited to those experiences. Some of this, I just kind of flipped the page to see what was on page 16 and saw the next chapter is called Change, Choice, and Gift, the Dynamic Nature of Covenant. So I suspect some of this is going to be some of this we'll kind of talk about next week and continue that next week.
But so is God just sort of like just hanging out inside of everything till it's time to offer us another choice? It's like, have you ever watched the show Person of Interest? It's about somebody has created this machine that's gone amok and knows when something bad is going to happen in the world and gives a clue. So like it's sort of like this, just like God is this machine just sort of out there sitting and waiting for us to do something, but God has no purpose other than to feed us these questions and these choices.
Let's say, Margaret, I saw your hand up first, and then we'll go to Stephen. But
if I understood Stuart correctly, I think he asked a very profound question earlier that only half got answered. And I think that he asked that the half that didn't get answered, as I understood it, was that he was asking whether there are ways in which we can influence God in order to fill me in. Maybe Stuart can say that better than I. Fill me in, Stuart. Ways in which we can act in a way to deliberately influence God. Come on, Stuart.
Well,
do it.
what I was wondering was whether when we relate to God, if that can change God, which may change the options that God offers us. However, on a different level, to me, on a deeper level, is whether that change in God affects positively or even negatively what the options are that he's going to offer us. They're not just, random options. They have some sort of basis that God may want to influence us on. So it's just, to me, something I've never thought of, that what I'm doing here in my living room has anything to do with what God is going to be offering me as choices. And I think that's just a different level of thought.
And that we can, I understood you say that we can be deliberate in the choices in order to deliberately influence God, or at least try to do so.
Yes, and that's exactly where I'd like the Rabbi to influence all of us to make the right choices that will change God in a positive way.
Yes.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Stephen?
Yeah, I guess what I'm struggling with is the concept of God that I'm getting through these classes is that God is not all powerful. God is something more like a really good friend who's really smart and really relatable, and you can have a deep relationship with, but it's not an all-powerful being. So it's like, well, I don't know, do we want a God that's not all-powerful? I mean, then you get into, well, but he's making, he allows evil, so he can't be all, then you get it going down that rabbit hole. But to me, I'm wondering if I like a little bit more powerful God than what I'm feeling in this.
Well, so I think we talked about this last week. Is God is not all powerful, because if God had all the power, then we would have none of it, and then there would be, we would have then, what's the point of anything that we're doing? Because God has all the power to do whatever God wants. But that means that if we have some of the power, that also means that God has to be in response and in relationship with us at all times. I think a lot about the piyut we say on Yom Kippur. Kianu Amecha Viata Eloheinu. We are your people, you are our God. We are your people, you are our king. We are your children, you are our father. You are our beloved, we are your beloved, you are our beloved. And I wrote about this once, and one of the rabbis who listened to it said, "Yeah, that's not If you really want a God who's going to be different every time you talk to, and I'm like, well, yeah, because sometimes I don't want a kingly figure. I want someone I can relate to more intimately. Sometimes I don't want a father. I want a friend. Sometimes I don't want. Sometimes I don't want a friend. I want a king. That God relates to us in different ways at different times. That's the dipolarity part of this. Some people like an all-powerful God, which is fine. That's not where Rabbi Artson is going, but it's fine. And then you just have to kind of understand some of the questions that Rabbi Artson and you raised. Like, okay, if God is all powerful, then how does evil exist? How does this happen? How does that happen? And you have to wrestle with understanding that instead. It is getting late, so I do want to wrap up and want to say two things to wrap up. These are good questions y'all are asking. And also want to point out we are on chapter 2 of 17, 18, if you count the conclusion. We're building, I hope you're writing some of these questions down for yourself. And as we go through, find out if Rabbi Artson actually answers them satisfactorily for you. I think some of it is he's trying to lay groundwork. So chapter 1, he's Rabbi Artson saying, okay, God is not all powerful, God is not all knowing, God is not all the omnis, God is not. God is dynamic and changing and in relationship. Great. Chapter 2, we are all in relationship with each other as well, and we are all in relationship with God. And so there's a dynamic here of choices kind of bouncing off each other and affecting the reality of the world around us. We haven't gotten to the final point yet. This isn't the final chapter, and we're raising all these questions. I think these are good questions to be asking, and as we go through, God willing, all these questions will get answered. So that's that's one thing I want to say is I don't think we're at the point where we can answer all the questions yet, and we can't necessarily answer all of where's the sphere of God's power, because we're still building some of these. We're still building on the foundation to be able to answer some of these questions. So, and so that's one thing I want to say. I think a second thing I want to say is it's good that we're wrestling and struggling with this a little, because that's how we're going to grow and learn from it. If this was straightforward and easy and everybody agreed on it, there wouldn't be all that much growth for us to do. This is supposed to be challenging. There's a level at which Rabbi Artson is challenging some very fundamental ideas we have about who and what God is, and that should be hard for us to fathom and struggle and understand, and because it is a flip of how we're trying to understand it. So good that you're not sold, and good that you're wrestling with it, and good that you're struggling with it, because we're not there yet. Last thing I kind of want to say is to kind of understand some of what he's saying at the end here on page 15 is, you'll have to forgive me, I think I sometimes get the two confused, and maybe somebody who's smarter than me can remember. There are a couple different concepts that overlay each other of God's role in the universe. There's pantheism and panentheism. One is that God is the entire world. That the world is God and God is the world. I'm pretty sure that's pantheism, if I remember correctly. That is not quite where Rabbi Artson is going. I think Rabbi Artson is going more into panentheism, which is that God is in every part of the world, and that God infuses everything that's going on in this world. So he talks about a rock, and that God is in the rock. God is in the tree. God is in us. God is in everything that is in this world, and that I think that's more of where he's going, is that if God is in everything in this world, then God is kind of nudging and pushing everything in this world to act to its maximum potential. We still have the choice of whether or not we're going to do that, and that's where some of the problems start to come from, is when we, for lots of different reasons that he'll talk about, we don't live up to our maximum potential or the maximum potential of the world. But that's kind of where he's starting to lay the groundwork, that God permeates the world, God dwells within the world, that there's nothing in this world that is not part of God, or God's presence is lacking from. So that's I want to make sure we're kind of understanding that part. Any other comments, thoughts, questions before we wrap up?
I just want to ask one quick thing. In the beginning, he says something about, if you're not so familiar with process philosophy, maybe you should read the letter he writes at the end before reading the book. And since you've read everything, do you suggest doing that?
I think at some point I had said, go ahead and read the letter whenever you want to read the letter. I don't know if we'll talk about the letter itself, but yes, go ahead and feel free to read the letter that he writes to his son Jacob. And it might help kind of give you a grounding. It might not. I don't know if we'll get to a point where we will sit down and we'll talk about his letter and what is he saying, what does he means. Towards the end, I think if we feel like it'll be helpful to discuss it, we can. If we don't feel like it will be, we won't. But we'll cross that bridge down the line.
It wasn't helpful to me to read.
Not at all.
And maybe I need to read it again after knowing a little more.
Yeah.
But
could I get the link for the recordings? Where do we look? for
I
them?
put it in the last email.
Okay.
It was there, but it's on the Temple Bethel YouTube channel under Beit Midrash. So, it takes a little while for the recording to actually download or set itself up. So I usually, Thursday evening or Friday, I usually try to upload it.
Okay. And so, so you just look up Temple Bethel on YouTube and
I would look up Temple Bethel Birmingham.
Birmingham. Okay.
There's a lot of Temple Bethels out there.
Yeah,
So
I would
if you look
think.
up Temple
Okay.
Bethel, you may not find it.
Might go down another rabbit hole.
Right.
Thank you.
Any
Thank you,
concluding
Rabbi.
thoughts, comments?
Lots, but it's time to go.
Well, have a good week, everybody. Be well, and look forward to learning chapter 3 together next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye-bye.